Behind the Shades.
So my name is Kelly Carpenter. I am the founder of The Other Side of Average, which is my website is theothersideofaverage.com. That's where you can find me, or at The Other Side of Average on, any social media. You'll find me there. And really, I am someone that has spent my lifetime learning to listen to the deep, wise voices within and to redefine, constantly redefine and, inquire into those places that define us, that define all of us, different, traumas or circumstances that had a large impact that we seem to get lost in. So this idea of really evolving beyond the story. And not only has it just been a lived experience and, after and alongside the lived experiences, I'm also a Chopra certified transcendent meditation teacher, conscious connected breathwork practitioner and trainer. I train facilitators, and a conscious relationship, conscious uncoupling, and conscious parenting coach. And like I said, really all that means is I help people redefine the things that have defined them.
Perfect. I know for me, when I look at my past relationships, I always felt, and this is either romantic, professional, even interpersonal, right? I felt that it defined me in a way because it was a moment in time. This is terrain 2009. This is terrain 2011. This is terrain 1999, and he is so wet behind the ears, he has no idea what he's doing. But I have the confidence I have to say that yes, I'm the man, but even though inside I'm still a little tiny boy. So when you're helping people redefine this, what are some of the steps that you take them through to have a better understanding of maybe themselves and their role in the world?
Great. You know, I look at each individual as, really this whole individual, this mind, body, soul. And my approach really comes from that holistic approach of working with the mind, the meaning that we've attached to, you know, terrain 1999 or some of the circumstances around that. And how do we, unravel and redefine the thoughts, the beliefs, the meaning we gave to a certain situation. But, that's only part of it. How do we work with the body, the restrictions? They say that the issues are in our tissues. So somatically, that cellular memory, that shutdown, those places that are, actually restricted. So working with how do we, release that on a cellular level, working with the emotions. I actually feel that every one of us needs to learn how to feel again, because those things, those places in time, or those moments in time that have defined us, is usually has some locked in emotions and feelings that are attached to it cellularly. And then on that more soul level, or, is how do we, what practices, can we implement and engage in to bring a certain stillness and presence in order to connect to the part of us that's bigger than those moments in time or those circumstances that we feel defined by. So I kind of work with all three of those areas.
And when you position it to your clients that way, is there a commonality that sometimes prevent them from achieving the type of success that you may help them to outline?
I think it's a matter of choice. When we're really working with a holistic approach in that way, it's really, the work works if we work it. right? So it's, you know, I often talk about choice is our greatest power. And it's this beautiful place between the person, you know, client in this particular case that, you know, has gained a certain awareness that they're suffering in some capacity, that they're stuck, that they're overwhelmed, that, you know, more is possible. And they've made a really deep choice to, you know, step into their healing because they know that, yeah, more is possible. Or they, you know, enough is enough of living in this place of suffering, combined with that holistic approach and really working with the whole body. You know, that's where the magic is. You know, I can't work my magic without them. Right. So it's the partnership that we enter into. And so as long as that choice is made, um, you know, I haven't had an experience of the work not working. I don't say that with, you know, some sort of arrogance, because it's very, you know, humbling. You know, they're doing the work equally the same as myself. It's just this beautiful partnership between the two of us that, and a deep trust, you know, not only just my lived experience, but, you know, my work with clients or my work even with my children. I have 3 children. Um, you know, it is, yeah, it's a very humbling, you know, place to be in, to really trust the innateness in an individual, that wholeness that lives in all of us, and to trust the pain. I always use the quote from Rumi is the wound is where the light enters us. Because when we actually trust pain that deeply, it will always guide us to the light. And so it doesn't matter where someone's struggling, you know, if they've made the choice to heal at that level and, you know, they're held in a place where they can really meet that pain or that place of suffering or that place of stuckness, with the right tools, it the wisdom within them and the wisdom in pain will guide us.
As I enter a reflective state of mind right now, as you're saying that, because your words were bringing me back to a time where I had no idea how to make any form of relationships work.
Mm,
Um, I struggled with my romantic relationships. I struggled with my friendships because I was putting expectations onto people that they didn't necessarily earn. For example, um, if I'm the type of friend that is always on time and I'm very considerate of Kelly's feelings, I would want you to do the same to me. But even though your behavior showed that you're always late, you're a jerk, you're not really a jerk. I'm just, giving an
yeah,
example.
of course.
And you're just like monster of a woman, then I should be judging you, or at least I should have expectations based on your behavior. So when you say some of these things, Kelly, I'm like, I wish I knew you in 2008
Mm,
because I was going through a time where I felt like I was lost. I would look at my friends, and the more success that I had, the more distance it created between myself and them. Do you find that to be happening in your experiences, maybe on a personal level, but also on a professional level with your clients?
mm. I Could you ask me that one more time? So I was like involved in your story, but I also want to hear it through the question one more time.
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll expand on my situation. So when I grew up without my mother or my father, I was trying to understand my place in the world.
Mhm,
And I felt that if I can surround myself with people who I felt love me in the way that I could be loved, I would share my success with them. So as I
mhm,
grew up, especially in my 20s, I started to find the type of job that I want. I started to date the type of woman that I want to date. I found success in my career. But as I was trying to share that success with the people who I felt were there for me, they weren't there for me in the way that I thought they would be. also they weren't there for me in the way that they showed that they would be. So when
Mhm.
you're looking at your life now or the life of those who you help, have you seen situations where they were trying to share successes in their life, but the people around them weren't receptive to it?
Yeah, I think that that happens, on many different levels at many different times. Is that, as we evolve and change, sometimes our, you know, connection, our relatability, maybe our lifestyle choices, aren't in alignment with someone else. But there's also a different level of that, is that sometimes it's that we're stepping out of a story. And most of us, those, stories that we're trying to step out of have some sort of victim, stance to them, that victim mentality. And there's a lot of people that, you know, in the world on many different levels that would like us to buy into our victim story because it supports their own. I have a story that I tell a lot. I was a child of meditation. And it wasn't because my mom was some guru, but really because she was suffering. She was suffering mentally, emotionally. She was a young mom. She was reactive. Yeah, she was just struggling. And then she, on top of that, a few years in, she was going through a messy, manipulative divorce. And she went to learn TM, or transcendental meditation. So I meditated just because I was told to meditate. And it my mom didn't have the capacity to really show up and be the mom in the way a deep down she desired to be, but she had enough awareness to bring me something like meditation. And that really helped me see, stay in contact to some degree with the part of me that's bigger than the story. Right. So I could have this witnessing awareness, we call it in the meditation world, is that I could see that these events and circumstances had an impact, but my struggle or my suffering on the inside was my inability to integrate it. It was the reliving of it, the feeling defined by it. And so, I also didn't know that it wasn't normal to have that awareness, but I did. I knew I wasn't the story, and I went to a counselor when I was 19. So, what do we do if we want to seek some help or we want to let go of some of these places in our past? We find a professional who's going to help us with that. And so I went to see a counselor, and it just felt horrible because she wanted me to buy into the fact that I was a victim, that, that needed to define me. And I went back for a second appointment, and I was like, this is definitely not the avenue or the path for me, because we all need those wounded places, or those places that have been hurt or victimized in some way. That wound, those emotions need to be honored. But for any of us, if we buy into the story, we're going to stay stuck there. So we want to honor the wound, really give safe passage to the emotions that are there, but not justify the story if we want to evolve beyond it, if we want to set ourselves free from it. And so, yeah, sometimes, professionals or people in our life, have a hard time watching us evolve beyond our story because it highlights theirs, or maybe they're not ready to step beyond it.
How was how was it growing up with that situation as you look back on it because you're not in it anymore, but you're out of it and reflecting upon it? How was that for
Mm-hmm.
you?
Yeah. Um, you know, it's there's a lot of compassion. My mom, you know, didn't, sometimes I say, imagine a world where mothers are really held, to fully nourish and nurture their children. The boys and the girls, we would all grow up in a different capacity, you know, less defined, you know, less barriers to love and to being loved and loving. And so I look back on it with a lot of compassion for the pain that she was carrying and the struggle that she had. And I've also just done a lot of work to really honor, the young girl in me that just wanted a mom to hold me, to, really see me. And I'm also really fortunate that I felt very loved by my mom. Like there's no part of me that didn't have an experience of what it felt like to be loved, but it was also confusing because she had this other part of her that, was in pain. And when people are hurt, they hurt, hurt people. And so there was, it was more confusing as a child. But then the gift of meditation allowed me to, step back to a certain degree. And I wouldn't be the mom that I am today if I didn't have the ability to experience what love was and what love wasn't. And then the gift of meditation where I could make a choice to choose what felt like love and to let go of what didn't feel like love.
That took me some time to differentiate between the two. I knew the type of love I wanted. I knew the type of love that maybe I felt that I deserved, but the love that I was looking for began to change from my teens to my 20s and now to my 30s. And the type of love that I can give out for the most part was the same. It was kind of evolving, but it's very similar to what it could be. And sometimes I look back at childhoods where maybe the parents didn't necessarily provide as much as they could have for that child or the children. And I wonder sometimes to myself, is that the type of love that they can give? Was their type of love limited in a way because they didn't ever create, or as you mentioned, define it? Right. And it made me kind of not hold too much against them because maybe that was the best that they could have given with what they've had. And it may not have been sufficient for me or maybe for you and for others, but for some people, it could have been sufficient enough because when I look back, when I look at you and I now, we're successful enough. It's not like we're homeless. It's not, there's a lot of things that we do have, and there may be things that we don't have, but overall, it appears we both live a good life. Is that one way to rationalize maybe what we've gone through from let's say someone who works with people through the meditation, through the understanding, and through the defining of what they're going through?
Mm-hmm. I think depending on our past experiences of what love is or what love isn't. And, I work in the field of trauma and consciousness and kind of where they overlap. And I've worked, in with Gabor Mate, through his professional training. And I always use his quote when it comes to trauma. And trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you, or sometimes that not happens to you. And I would say, yes, as parents, with the level of consciousness that they had, they did do the best that they can. And that doesn't mean that some of our needs were met as children, or that we even attached meaning to certain things innocently, even ourselves. And so, it created this restriction or this constriction, this shutdown, on the inside. And to me, those are our barriers or our armoring. And they all had a purpose. They actually were there to keep us safe, because maybe something in that moment didn't feel safe, or maybe someone's emotions that were around us didn't feel safe, or ours weren't given safe passage and allowed to be expressed. So many different ways and things that we could talk about there. But ultimately, there are barriers to loving and being loved. And when I talk about that, I mean, that ultimate loving and being loved without condition. Because a lot of us have experiences of love being conditional in our upbringing. And, I really truly believe that our deepest purpose in this world is to dismantle those barriers to love, because our deepest purpose is to love and be loved without condition. And sometimes I don't even like the word, using the word love, because there's so much condition around it. There's so much attachment to, well, love looks like this or doesn't look like this. And to me, that unconditional love is just like, I see you. I see you, and I'm I'm here to meet these messy edges or these sticky edges that might come up that does come up in all relationships of all sorts. And and I'm here to meet those messy or sticky edges and let them be the pivotal point and opportunity to dismantle the barriers and the armoring, to joining, to accepting, to allowing. It's a beautiful thing to allow someone to be as they are and not need them to be another way in order to love them. And if we can't, then it's a beautiful thing to let them go.
I wonder if the parents out there who are having difficulties can truly understand that, because as you shared your parents and as you shared with me before we started, um you were in a marriage as well, and it can be very hard, I believe, for some people to accept that what they're doing isn't good enough.
Mm.
um I know if I was in a relationship and the person told me, Terrain, what you're doing isn't good enough, one of the first things I would do is probably jump up and be like, okay, help me to be good enough. But that's a very humbling experience, and that's a very humbling question to ask, because I'm sure there's people that's going to say, well, Kelly, if my love isn't good enough for you, Jane down the street says that it's good enough. Or someone I was with before you says it's good enough. Or that person over there, you know what? They've been trying to get me to be with them and show them love and things like that. So there's this whole dynamic, and you can be in a situation that maybe you're afraid to go get the type of love that you want because this person has conditioned you to believe that you're not good enough for any other type of love than this one. When you mentioned conditions, what are some of the conditions that come up to you when you hear people talk about love?
Mm. Mm. Like, what are the conditions that I hear them talk about, or just what are, yeah. Um, and it can also, because I work with parents a lot, um, and within partnerships. And I guess in my experience, like the partners that come to me to work through things, it's it's more a matter of their willingness to work through it. I guess it's back to that choice that we talked about. That I think it's just an understanding that we, to some degree, we all have these conditions, these conditional ideas, or these things that define love. And are we willing to dismantle them so that we can expand our idea of love? Most of the people that have conditions, it's, around some sort of behavioral pattern that someone has. And it can really range. And it's also understanding. So it's like, parents towards their children. Well, if you have that behavior, you're not going to get this, that, or the other, or not my attention, or, number of things, or, within relationships as well. And I think it's that understanding that, when we look at mental, emotional, and behavioral patterns, they're all in service to a true unmet need. So in raising my children, for example, it wasn't so much, I might see the behavior. I might not even love or like the behavior, but I knew that they weren't the behavior. And I knew that beyond that behavior, there's a need that wants to be met. Some part of them, wants to be held and seen and loved. And so, can I move towards them in a place where I can support them and to meet that need so they feel filled up on the inside, and maybe some of that, behavior might shift or change. In reference to a partnership, we can also just get to, a point in our relationship where there's some things that aren't negotiable. We can work with that partner. Again, two people have to be willing, to do the work necessary to dismantle the barriers to love and the things that have defined them in the past, that, or meet those needs that, are creating or really the cause of, some of the behavior that's out there. First and foremost, they have to be willing. Otherwise, a relationship won't work. It's just, it just is. Partnerships they take two people. And, and I want to say that acts of love, acceptance, kindness, compassion are never wasted. It's not wasted energy to move towards someone in a place of compassion, in a place of really seeing them, really acknowledging the pain that they might be feeling, or even if you don't know exactly what it is, the hurt that's underneath the behavior. The only time that love is wasted if it's not also equally directed at ourselves. So, if there's a behavior that, someone is sharing and they're not willing to do the work, and, you're not loving yourself enough to set that boundary of, of that, if it's hurting you, then that, that's where, you still want to act in that form of love, but sometimes also love hurts.
The situation that you just described, how love hurts and you want it to be directed towards you as well, and you want to understand it, as you mentioned, because when it's two people together, they have to come together to do it, right? It can't be just be one person who's draining the other person, who feels like a drain on them, right? Because they're loving, they're loving, they're loving, and this other person is just taking the love, taking the love, taking the love, but they're not giving it out. Um, from a personal standpoint, were there any time in your life where you felt that you were going through something where the techniques that you have now you could have benefited from back then?
Mm. Absolutely. I mean, what comes to my mind is, within my own relationship. I was married for 18 years, almost 19 years. And when my husband and I met, we met at a personal development program, and I had already done, the work is never done. I want to make that very clear. But I had done a huge amount of my own, healing prior to. And when we met, I could see that, he had some childhood pain that he was hanging on to. And before entering into a relationship, so he wanted to be in a relationship. Before entering into a relationship, I already knew I had made a choice to be a conscious parent many years prior, that if I was entering it, and I had enough of my own, you know, I don't know, unconscious relationships where we're just in a relationship, going through the motions. And I knew that what I really wanted, a conscious relationship, someone that was willing to go beyond their own barriers, you know, go beyond their own, limits to loving. Because I was also at a place where I knew I deserved that. Not only did I just desire it, but I knew what I was there to offer and wanted the same. And I also was very clear that, he wasn't in that place at that moment, but that was okay because I really don't feel like the grass is greener on the other side. The grass is greener where we water it. So it was more, and I believe in the level of healing that's possible when someone chooses that. So, I had a conversation with him right at the beginning and said, this is what I'm looking for. You know, are you in? We met in a personal development workshop and spiritual workshop. So it's not like the language was, far stretched for him. And, it was a resounding yes. We wanted the same thing. And I still believe that to this day. But his ability to, choose, there's only three ways in which we suffer. And that's either we're believing the thoughts we're thinking, we're avoiding pain and vulnerability in the body that's stored in the body, and we're disconnected from who we really are. So his behavioral patterns or the places that he suffered and, couldn't show up in how he wanted to show up or was created to be in this world, um, isn't really who he is. But are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to meet some of that pain and vulnerability? Are you really willing to, to understand that the thoughts we're thinking are really quite bullshit? That every step in the stage, as we work through those, we realize what we don't know, and we can change our beliefs. And his willingness was there, his desire was there, but he never made the choice at the deepest levels. And, his pain was just ran that deep.
I know for me, I dated a girl and she admitted in one of the conversations we had that she had some issues and how it was impacting her relationship. And as you mentioned, the thoughts was big for her, the second of the three that you mentioned, because she can sit there and I always always make the joke you're dreaming it up, right? But she can sit there and she can have these thoughts enter her mind and she can almost convince you that they're real, that it's reality, right? She'll design her own reality in her head and then get upset at you. And then when you mention it that, let's say, for example, I wasn't even there or didn't say that, things like that, then she begins to doubt it. And you can see in her face the thoughts and everything forming, right? And now what she would do, she would begin to get upset at you because now it's like, okay, he's distorting what I believe because she's like, because she understands it's not real, but she doesn't want to be viewed as crazy. And her words, not mine. And so one of the issues that I one of the things that I was trying to work through it with her was just a conversation piece. Let's talk about, okay, you have this type of thought, why? You're thinking this, why? You believe it, why? Right? But it got to the point where she unfortunately didn't want to do the work.
Mhm.
And I would give her the comparison that like she had children. When you have your child and you're walking down the street, you can walk side by side, you're together. You can walk where you're dragging the child,
Mhm.
or you could walk and end up that you're walking the path alone because the person doesn't even want to move. And I told her we have to be one of those three. So which one do you want to be? Are your conversations that frank?
Yes. When the at the very beginning with my relationship, I let him know that the only thing that I asked of him was that he did the work to love himself enough, to be his most authentic expression, because I knew that if he loved himself enough, he would have the capacity to love me enough. We could walk together. And because he's interested in this field of work, we could have lots of conversations about it. But there's difference to have a conversation about it or to have intellectualized understanding about it versus, actually embodying it and living it. That's where that deeper level of work is really important, because just because we know the concepts doesn't mean we're living them. If that pain is still held in his body and he's still believing some of those really limited parts, we could have conscious conversations, and then he could also, similar to my mom, right? We often marry our parents, right? So my mom is this incredibly beautiful human with this amazing heart that I could feel, and yet she also was carrying so much pain that, she had behavior that came with that pain that really impeded her ability to love me. It also impeded her ability to receive love from me. And that's the same patterning with my husband. There's so much beauty there and so much, greatness there. And yet these really deep, unconscious, painful parts of him that he wasn't willing, you know, didn't make the choice, even within conscious conversation and, understanding of this work, just didn't make the choice to really do that deep level of healing so that he could love himself enough in a way that he was then capable to love his family.
Is that the starting point for many people? Is the self-love aspect of many of their struggles, I guess, in relationships, either as a parent, a child, or otherwise?
Yeah. Again, there's that word love that can have, some human pieces of it and, layered into it. And, I guess if we're not loving, if we're not able to have acts of love and kindness and compassion and acceptance and leaning into the messiness, of life and the ebbs and flows, because they're always going to be there, in a way that we can receive from them, because every obstacle, every situation that feels challenging is a divine opportunity. Like, that is something I firmly, stand on. But it doesn't mean that we're supported in developing that or have the right tools to develop that, but that is truth. And so, those places that we aren't able to love and be loved in some capacity will point back to some wound, right? Because then that's just that armoring or a barrier to love. And if we really pull back the lens and we do some of that deeper work, there'll be some need that was unmet as a child, some pain that, is still in the body that wants to be held and felt and acknowledged, and so when we can, know that these, sometimes there's that quote, the obstacle is the way, right? So when we can really meet some of those wounds, or the Rumi quote, the wound is where the light enters, when we can go into some of the messiness, in those challenging situations, or there's maybe those things that don't quite feel like love, we can use them. But again, it takes a choice. For some people, meeting that level of pain just feels like too much.
Kelly, as we close, there's two things I want to ask you, and I hope you'll answer it like you always been answering today very eloquently. Is how important is it to know that we have more choice than we give ourselves credit for? That's my first question.
Mm. I think it's everything. We always have more choice than what we give ourselves credit for, and we can't see what we can't see. So, oftentimes I'm a really big promoter of conscious support, the ones that can really trust the pain, that, see us beyond our story and can help us rise through it. So yeah, we can't see what we can't see. So being held and supported to move through some of those, so that we actually see that we have unlimited amount of choices in every moment.
And my second question before we leave is, what advice do you want to give to those who are listening to make sure that they show up consciously, as well as know the power that they have within themselves?
Mm. Mhm. That whenever we're activated, so as far as the advice, because one of the things about relationships is that it can be really triggering, activating. They're going to be, and it doesn't matter if it's a business relationship or relationship with your child or relationship with a partner, that to the degree that you're activated, or to the degree that you're triggered, it has more to do with your past than it has to do with the situation at hand. Otherwise, you would just simply respond. That there's always three parts to a trigger. It's what is activating from the past, what the situation in the present moment is there to be responded to, and what it's really calling us to know more of our wholeness, to dismantle those barriers to love, to lots of different ways I can explain it, but there's three things that are going on. And I love the analogy of a trigger or an activation, comparing it to an actual weapon, the trigger on a weapon. If there's no explosive material inside of the weapon, what does that trigger do? And yeah, nothing. It just goes click, click. And so, it's the same in our life, that if we're really highly triggered and activated, it's activating this explosive material, this unconscious material within us. And so that's always that first place to start, is really learning how to unravel, to use, what I call somatic inquiry, to really unravel what this is for us. Because when we understand that there's more to the situation than what we might be experiencing, then not only do we feel freed up from that trigger, but we also take other people off the hook, because most of the time we're, and because we're meeting that need on the inside, because most of the time we have some sort of expectation that that person's going to meet our needs, and no one else can meet our needs but us. So when we kind of, unravel that and work with all of those parts of that activation, that choice that you mentioned in the previous question, there's so many more choices available to us.